Well, it looks to me like we're right about 1 o'clock. Start time for our last Saturday speaking program of the season. Thank you folks for coming out today. It's nice to see such a full house. My name is Greg Kenny. I'm the program coordinator, and it's been my honor and my privilege to put together our Saturday programs. We call it the Price of Freedom series, and we started way back in November, and here we are at the end of April. And hopefully those of you that I see a few faces that have been pretty common through the Saturdays, hopefully you've appreciated it, and I think we've done a good job. We're going to end real strong here. We've got the Yamamoto Shootdown program with one of my very favorite speakers of any program series, and that's Mr. Blaine Mack. Before we do that, however, I want to thank a few, and this is one of the last chances of the season I get to thank our volunteers, so I'm going to start with them. Our volunteers do darn near everything there is to be done around the museum. There's over 300 of them. They man all the hangar floors, the library, the gift shop, the simulators. They do the kids' tours, the adult tours. Our volunteers really are what keep this air museum alive. So how about a hand for our volunteers? The other group I'd like to thank are those that have the green wristbands on today. If you've got a green wristband, would you raise it up? Museum members, thank you folks. Thank you for supporting the Air Museum. Thank you for believing in our mission. You know, we strive to preserve, educate, and honor. That's what the airplanes are all about. That's why we do these programs. That's why we've got that beautiful zero over there that the commemorative Air Force brought in. We're trying to preserve the history and honor those that made that history and educate everyone as to what that was all about. So the members here are helping us to do that. Putting $8 a gallon into a zero costs money. All the airplanes throughout the season cost money. Everything that we do. So the members are the ones that give their financial resources to help us out. And I really do thank them that allow me to come here and consider this a job. It's kind of silly to call it a job. I get to be around World War II airplanes every day of the week, but you know what? It is a job, and I do get a paycheck, and I thank all of those that come through the door and support the Air Museum and enable us to have a full-time educator, me. So thank you. And if you're here today and you're not a member and you think it's a worthwhile place and maybe something that should be continued on in the coming years, please do consider becoming a member with us. Folks up at the gift shop, volunteers, will be happy to get you signed up today. You get your admission dollars right back at you again, so your admission today counts towards your membership. And I really hope you'd become part of the family. We'd love to have you. The last group that I want to thank are those that have served our country in uniform. If you've served our country, would you be kind enough to raise your hand so we could see you? Thank you. Thank you for your service. Thank you for our freedom. We wouldn't be here today or any other day without you. Well, our speaker today, Mr. Blaine Mack, attended Oregon State College. He entered flight training and was commissioned as a second lieutenant on February 8th, 1944. After receiving his wings, he trained at B-25s and then was assigned to P-38s in the Aleutian Islands. After the war, he left the service but was recalled during the Korean War. He flew the F-86 Sabre, similar to the one that we recently acquired, and hopefully by this time next year we'll have put together. I saw on the ramp in like a gajillion pieces. Sorry, that was a sidelight. After the Korean War, he was drafted into SAC, Strategic Air Command, flying the B-47 and the B-52. He was awarded the Air Medal, and speaking on behalf of myself, he is an outstanding human being. How about a hand for our speaker today, Mr. Blaine Mack? And would you all please rise for the national anthem performed today by the Fault Line Quartet.
Say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming
Thank you. Now comes the scary part that said, is it going to work for me? This is one of my favorite topics for discussion for a lot of reasons. First of all, it's one of the least known and most important elements of World War II. No event was shrouded in mystery quite as much as this one, for a very good reason. We had cracked the Japanese code quite some time before, and there's still a great dispute over exactly when. I'm not sure anybody's ever really going to know. But it allowed this event to take place. Without that, it never would have happened. The other side of it, everything has a plus and a minus. And the minus in this was that under no circumstances could we allow the Japanese to know we had cracked their code, because they did not know. And that was almost as important as cracking the code itself. By the time this occurred, our intelligence people were reading the Japanese mail with regularity every day of the week. And when this news of this came through, things happened in a hurry. Again, and I'll get into this just a little bit later on, why some of the things that should have happened did not take place for that very reason. They could not allow the Japanese to know that we knew what they were going to do before they did. I'd like to start off by putting the major players in this event first. It worked. First of all, this is a picture of the map that's in the Pacific Hangar over here, and it's almost but not quite right. It's very, very close. As close as they were able to do at the time it was made some almost 15 years ago. It gives you an idea. Everything within that red line there, at that time, this is in the summer of 1942, belonged to the Japanese. Take a look at that. And I want to talk a little bit about a couple things there that might have changed that even more. There's a lot of dispute about what was really the turning point in the Pacific in World War II. They always say it was the Battle of Midway, and there's good reason for feeling that way. But there are a couple other things that maybe are just as important. I'm going to talk about one of them in just a minute, and that's the loss of Admiral Yamamoto. But to me, in my own mind, the turning point in World War II has always been the Pearl Harbor attack. Why do I say that? Because I still believe that had Yamamoto been in that fleet, we would never have had the oil docks left, or the repair hangars, or anything left. There would have been nothing left. And that's a dispute all in itself. But it was set up by the fact that after the first two attacks, the pilots of the attack aircraft, the fighters, all of them, begged Admiral Nagumo to allow them to take out a third strike and take out the repair docks, the oil fields, and everything else. And had they done that, our nearest port for the Navy would have been San Diego. And that gives you food for thought right there. So I have always felt that the war really turned about 12 hours after the first bomb was dropped. What occurred here is something else. So let's talk about the major players here. This gives you an idea of what we had to work with then. And we were still overcoming all of this. This is Admiral Yamamoto. I always like to compare him to a pit bull. Because the guy was loyal, he was brilliant, and people blamed him for being mean when actually it was anything but. This is the man who tried to talk, the only one, the warlords in Japan against going to war with the U.S. He had lived here for a while. He had been an air attaché in Washington, D.C. for as nearly as I'm able to make out, approximately 2 years. He had been to Harvard. He knew the American people very, very well. And he did his very best to talk them out of it. He was not successful, as we know. They turned around and gave him the job of doing the very same thing that he told them not to do. And he did the very best. And had they followed his directions, I just gave you a minute ago the scenario that we would have had. He was a gentleman, and it was many years after the war was over that I was able to come to my own terms and realize what a good, wholesome man he really was, a person who did his job and did it better than probably anybody else in the world could have done. He was a genius. He was no, you did not play poker with him, not unless you had a lot of money. He was very smart. And the way he planned the attack on Pearl Harbor was proof of that. He was absolutely idolized in Japan, and for very good reason. It was April 18th, as I remember, 1943. That particular date has importance in history because it was April 18th, 1942, that Jimmy Doolittle and his bunch made the first raid on Japan and shocked that country like nothing else ever has done. Because until that time, everybody in Japan knew that we could not touch them. We could not get them. Now, why did this occur exactly 1 year later? We think that's the reason why. No one will ever know, because we couldn't pick his brain anyway. He wasn't about to do that. But there had to be a significance why he was flying to see his people down in Rabaul and places of that sort exactly 1 year later, right to the day, almost to the minute. He had another characteristic which, unfortunately, I suffer from the very same flaw. If we're going to do something at 1 o'clock, we're not going to do it at 1:01. We're going to do it at 1 o'clock. We're not even going to do it at 1:00 and 22 seconds. We're going to do it at 1. I've never been able to get over that, and he couldn't either. It led to his downfall. Because when this came through, that's what it was based upon, was his sense of punctuality. Absolute punctuality. He was an even worse nut on it than I am. He was going to fly in that Betty aircraft that we just saw there. There were going to be two of them. Betty at that time was our equivalent of the B-25, which is back there in the corner. It was a very good airplane. And their main bomber, theirs were all twin-engine bombers at that time, as far as I know. And two of them were going to fly down to see the troops down in South Pacific. And one of those, he would be aboard. The other was a decoy. They would be marked exactly the same, so that no one, other than the people inside the aircraft, knew which one was which. As I said, he was a nut for detail. He didn't miss a thing. Very bright man. They were to be escorted by 6 of these Zeros, which we have here and we're privileged to see today. And I'll talk a little bit about that airplane before we get off of it. The Zero, the A6M, I'm not sure what version those were. Ours is a -3. It was Japan's top fighter at the time, a very, very good aircraft. It was designed for a long range, very nimble, very effective fighter, and it was all of that. But there's one rule in the law of physics that you can never ignore. If you're going to get something, you have to give something to get that. In this case, in order to get the long range, the very nimble, high speed, quick turning radius and all of that, you have to give up weight. So what did we give up? They gave up armor plating, which most of our fighters had a considerable amount of around the pilot. Gave up self-sealing gas tanks, and we're not sure they even had them, but they didn't have them in those aircraft. They gave up a lot of different things structurally in order to lessen the weight. So its very strongest point was also its weakest points under certain circumstances. They would not take the abuse that any of our airplanes would take. And I've always said, particularly in terms of World War II, that I was always grateful I was flying airplanes that were designed by American engineers and built by American women. Because they were the best. So that is a Zero that was escorting it, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. This is the P-38, which you see a model of right here. This particular one is a model of Dick Bong's. Dick Bong was, if you didn't know, excuse me, the leading American ace of World War II with 40 victories. That's a J model there. It's a little older than the one I flew. Marvelous, marvelous piece of equipment. Still my all-time favorite airplane of anything I ever flew. It would get you out of more trouble than even people like me could get into. It was a long range, but here again, you gave something to get something. Excuse me. It did not have the turning radius, particularly at certain ranges and altitudes, to stay up with that thing. So what was the answer to that? Don't try it. Use yours. Make them fight your battle. It was rugged, tough, a lot of armament, and talk about long range, it really did. 12 hours sitting on a wrapped up dinghy in one of those was not unusual. It was also blessed to have 2 engines, which we very rarely needed the second one to get home. But boy, when you needed it, you needed it. This was a list of the people that were on that flight. They selected, when the report came down first, that Yamamoto was going to go down there to visit, and I'll show you a map of that in just a moment. The P-38, the 339th Squadron, was selected to do that because the P-38 had the longest range of any of our fighters down there. And it just, by chance, fell to the 339th Fighter Squadron, of which Major Mitchell was the commander at the time. And they were to intercept him and shoot him down. One interesting fact, as I looked at those a while back, at that time we had 48 states. And if you look carefully at where those people came from, 2 came from California, 2 came from Texas, and all the rest of them came from a different state. There were 12 of the 48 states represented in that flight right there. And I think that's worthy of some kind of notice. This is the group.
Oh, I know that.
And that was taken after they landed. And the way we can tell that is by the number, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. This is Henderson Field, Guadalcanal, which is where the 339th was flying out of. Not exactly where you would want any of your present-day airliners to fly out of, let's put it that way. But at least they did have some level ground around there, which not everybody had in those days. The runways and taxiways were what we used to call Marston strip, pierced steel planking. And the way they would build those runways out in the jungle and the tundra and wherever it was, the dozers and the graders would come in and level a field. And then they lay down these metal things that clamped together, and they had holes, which was where the name pierced steel came from. And the idea was that that would keep you from sinking into the mud or the tundra or whatever it was that was soft ground, because so many of these places were wet. In the Pacific, I don't know what a dry runway looked like. But at any rate, they had some inherent, shall we call them, dangers. Because the way they were clipped together, every once in a while, one of those clips would pop up just from wear and bending and flexing and this sort of thing. And usually that was no problem. In this case, it was. Originally, there were 16 in this flight to go after him. On the takeoff, one of those blew a tire on that pierced steel planking. Fortunately, he did not damage the airplane. He was able to get it stopped without doing any more damage. I think he took the prop on it, but other than nothing that major. Another one went right away when you're carrying tanks like these are doing, external tanks, which if you look carefully under the picture there, you can see the tanks hanging underneath. They hang right underneath the inner wing panels between the pilot's compartment and the two engines. That's where your external tanks come. I'm not sure exactly what size theirs were. Ours were usually 165s, 165 gallon. And those were probably the same. And the very first thing you do, as soon as you're able and you get up there, is to switch onto those tanks. Because you need every drop of gas that you can get. I have never known anybody to come back from a mission or to talk about coming back from a mission saying, gee, I wish I'd had a little less gas than I had. They usually came back saying, boy, I could have used another 5 gallons. Because they were all long range, and this was no exception at all. So they go into their drop tanks, and the next thing that happens is one of the guys can't get it to feed. He can't get one of them to feed. That's worse than neither one of them feeding. Because it's tough to land one of those things with one tank empty. So of course, the first thing you do when you find out you can't do that is switch back off and go to your tanks and at least try to keep it balanced. He got back all right, no problem, but he was scrubbed from the mission. So now we're down to the 14 that you saw the pictures of, and the ones you saw listed. This is a picture of the same one you see right here. And if you look very carefully up there, right above the lead on the right, and it's hard to see here, but in the picture here it shows, you see 2 little blips, that's the 2 Bettys. And then right up there, near the top of that cloud, you see 6 other little blips, 2 groups of 3. Those are the escorting zeros, 6 of them. Now, you have to understand that in those days, we were often accused of not having any intelligence. And that worked both ways, I might add. We had no idea exactly what was there. They did know one thing, there would be 2 Bettys. That's all they knew. They also knew that in that surrounding area, there was a total of somewhere between 75 to 77 zeros at different bases. Are these guys going to be up there to protect them? Who knows? Nobody knows. So that's what they're trying to figure out ahead of time. So many unknowns in this equation that you just marvel when you look back on it that it went the way it did. This is the route they followed. Now, you need to understand that everything north of Guadalcanal is Japanese territory. And as crude as it was in those days, they had radar. And I say that not insultingly at all, but rather complimentary, because radar was brand new. We actually, for a while, thought the British were the only ones that had it. And then we found out the Japanese did, and we got ours from the British, and then started building our own and the rest of that. But in Europe, the British have been using a very crude and very huge form of radar equipment for a couple of years. They assumed, and probably correctly, that there could be radar all along those islands up there. So therefore, they're going to stay below that. They're going to stay out to sea. Radar does have a limitation as to how far down it could come, because it's a line of sight. And while we seldom think of it, there is a curvature of the earth, and it's noticeable when you're not that far. So that shows you the route that they're going to fly. The very last turn there is the crucial one. And it has to be right on time, and 1 minute later, they're going to start their climb. And this is where the drama really takes place. In reading the accounts from Major Mitchell himself, when they made the turn, and he gave the motion, they're all radio silence, of course, to start the climb. They all started, and he said, I looked up there, and I couldn't see anything. And in his words, my heart went right to the floor. We missed him. And he said, almost to the point where it brought tears. And he said, just about that time, someone came on the radio and said, bogeys 11 o'clock high, which is the name of that painting. And they looked up, and there they were, the two of them. When you go to intersect, of course, you don't head for them. You head for where they're going. They started their climb, and in the ensuing battle, those things, a dogfight is almost impossible to explain to someone else, even someone who's been in a lot of them. Because it just seems like it's a wild melee. Just, unbelievable. It isn't like an organized thing with a football team where I'm blocking this guy and he's blocking that at all. This is just airplanes going at each other. And you're trying to keep from getting hit at the same time you're trying to hit somebody else. They went for the bombers. They said, that's what we're after, to heck with everything else. And in the ensuing melee that took place, they shot down both Bettys, 5 of the 6 Zeros. Nobody's ever accounted for what happened to number 6. Nobody seems to know what he did, where he went. He would just go on. We lost 1. I think, as I remember, it was Bisbee Holmes, who was last seen trailing smoke going down into the jungles. That was the only one we lost. On the way home, one of the others started running low on fuel. The only thing they could figure out was that he had gotten hit in a fuel line or something and lost some fuel because he had much less than anybody else. He managed to find a crude Navy strip out in the middle of some island that he didn't even know where it was, but it was on the way home, and landed there. Very interesting thing. What's he going to do with that airplane sitting there and no fuel in it? Very simple. You get out of the Navy dock where the PT boats have, because they're running the same Allison engine that thing's running. And you get some of their fuel and put it in your tank and fly home, which is exactly what he did. Every once in a while, and this is probably the most difficult thing to believe out of the entire story, sometimes even the Navy and the Army would cooperate with each other. They tried to keep it a secret. They didn't want anybody to know it. as they got home, they were, of course, once they found out, and they did find out that the third one who went down, the one that was low on fuel, landed safely because somebody, his wingman, went with him and then went on home and said, yes, he got down fine. And so then they were all pretty happy about the outcome of things because they had done their job and done it very well. The story might have ended there, but it almost is like the beginning of the story rather than the end, because all that did was set the stage for what was to come later. First of all, while they were awarded great awards, the squadron commander was not given the proper award. And the reason for that, he did not get the Medal of Honor, which it was submitted for him. The reason for that, and I will always disagree with this, because they were afraid that that news would get out, and then the Japanese would know, in fact, that we had broken their code. As it was, the Japanese, the few that survived that whole fiasco, had no idea where the airplanes had come from. They just stumbled across them as far as they were concerned. And that's the way the War Department, which is what we have at that time, wanted it to stay. I understand their feeling, but I don't know too many of us that ever agreed with that. Because what this man had pulled off was an absolute miracle. You have to understand, I want to go back a little bit and talk about navigating in those days. We had what they call a whiskey compass, which was called a whiskey compass because that rotating thing was in alcohol. And that was so that the alcohol would not expand and contract with the temperature changes. And it would always be free to float around in there. And it was very accurate, sometimes as close as 30 degrees off. So what you tried to do, you had a little directional gyro there, and what you tried to do was average out what that whiskey compass was doing, and let's set your DG by that and fly by that gyro, and which meant you had to update that about every 10 or 15 minutes. And if you remember how those aircraft were spread out, and you look at this one right there, even that was considered a close formation for navigating over water. We would spread way out. Why did you do that? The biggest reason is so that every aircraft there can navigate. And if you were leading a flight, and you got as much as a degree off heading, if you had 16-ship flight, 15 of them would be yelling at you, check your heading. Because that's how you survived. Because there's nothing out there. You know, we get these neat little maps with all these marks on them, so longitudinal. None of those marks show up in the water. Not one of them. Never seen one. That way. And that's where you go. And the marvel of that, all through, particularly the Pacific, from almost the North Pole on down, and we were in all of those areas. Miles and miles of water. Nothing but water. And you fly for 700 or 800 miles. And I know exactly how Major Mitchell felt, because I can remember that once myself. Oh my God, I missed it. And then all of a sudden, there it is on the horizon. Where is it? Exactly where you want it. How did you do that? Most people call that blind, dumb luck. But they would do it time after time. These people had not only to do that, because they can't see that land they're flying. Not only did they have to do that, but they had to find two little specks up there that they hoped were where they were supposed to be at the time they were supposed to be there. Think about that sometime. Navigation in those days was so crude that we look back on it and wonder now, how did anybody survive? But not only did anybody, but most people did. And the real wonder is not the number of people we lost, but the number of people we didn't lose. We never kept track of those, but our losses were relatively small. So anyway, after all the smoke settles, and they awarded Major Mitchell, I think, a Legion of Merit, as I remember. Anyway, it was a good medal, but it was something that doesn't make the daily news like a Medal of Honor does. And as things began to develop, then came the controversy that followed. There's a lot of story here. Who really shot down Yamamoto? Now, when you go in on these things, and this was typical, just typical attack. If you have a 12 or a 16 ship flight, and those were the two standard numbers, more or less, then you usually have, in this case they call them a killer flight, because that's a flight that's actually going to go in and try to take him out. The rest of them are going to fly top cover, take care of those 6 zeros that are up there. And they did a pretty good job of it. And there might be more coming. You don't know where they are or where they're going to be. And then if it's a typical ground thing, then you rotate around and switch. This wasn't. This was a one-purpose flight. Out of the flight, one of them, and if I remember correctly, it was Bisbee Holmes. And don't hold me to that because my memory is sometimes not quite as good as it ought to be, was lost. That's the one that went down when they last saw him going into the jungle smoking. The other 3 returned. And Tom Lanphier was the leader of the killer flight. You have his picture in your program there. And he claimed that he shot down the Betty that Yamamoto was in. And he had good reason to claim that. There came some dispute, not from him, but from other people that know Rex Barber shot him down. And that Tom Lanphier had shot down the decoy. This went on, off and on for years, to the point where they actually formed an organization called the Second Yamamoto Mission, of which I belonged to for a long, long time, until they finally resolved the issue. And the purpose in that was to go to the jungles and find that airplane, and they can determine that, because they knew exactly which way both of those Bettys were shot down. The 2 fighter pilots told their stories, so now all they got to do is find the airplanes, and they finally did. And it was kind of interesting. This is the 3 of them, and you have that picture in your program. That's Tom Lanphier on the left, and Rex Barber on the right. And this shows you a picture of Yamamoto, this is a painting, of course, of Yamamoto's aircraft going down. And notice where it was hit. In the left fuselage, set on fire, and the airplane peeled off to the right. Now, if they find an airplane that fits that description, then whoever did that is the one that shot down Yamamoto. They did. There it is in the jungles in New Guinea. They finally found it. They made 3 different trips into that jungle to determine, because they didn't want any whitewash. What they saw was what they were going to write down and what they took pictures of. And if you look at that fuselage, it's obvious. And at that point, it was, the Air Force changed its entire entire account of that and gave Rex Barber credit for having actually shot down Yamamoto, which he said he was pretty sure he had. But they didn't know. There was no way they could identify which one, because they were identical tail numbers and everything else for a reason. Sometimes good comes out of bad. And one of the good things is that, you know, we talk about people trying to take credit for those things that they didn't do. And I don't think that was the case with Tom Lanfair at all. Some people did. I never believed that. I think he was sincere. And while it sounds a little morbid, I will say this. Fortunately for him, he passed away still thinking that he had done it, because the proof was developed after he had passed away. He really thought he had done one of the greatest things in World War II. And you couldn't take it away from him, because he did. It just wasn't that one. There's another interesting feature about that. I grew up in the state of Oregon, and like all states, it has some of the goofiest laws you could ever think of in your life. If you want to come up with some really stupid law, tell me what it is, and give me a little while, I'll find a state that has that law. I'll guarantee it. One of theirs was that no bridge in the state of Oregon is to be named after a living person. Now, you tell me what sense there is in that. I don't know. But at any rate, that was their law. They finally did violate, and they took a special act of their state legislature to make a one-time exception to their own law. And the bridge over the Crooked River used to be called the Crooked River Bridge, which is just north of Madras, for those of you that know northern central Oregon. The Crooked River Bridge, a few years back, was renamed the Rex Barber Bridge. Rex Barber Memorial Bridge, I think, is the true title. So he finally got credit for what he did. One of the most fascinating things, I think, and this subject has always fascinated me, because there were so many twists and turns, and only one thing out of all of these unusual happenings, only one thing came out exactly the way it was planned. And that's that they intercepted him and shot him down right almost to the minute when they planned to do it. How many of us can say that? I'm lucky to get to the service station before I run out of gas. So anyway, that was a picture of Rex Barber. I had the pleasure of meeting him one time, and he was just like any of you out there sitting around. Very humble person, and deserving of all the credit that we could possibly give him. World War II, like all wars, is filled with all kinds of twists and turns. Unexpected things. One of the neat things is that when you're asked to do a talk up here for something, it isn't difficult to come up with a subject. And if you happen to have been involved with any of those people, you know which ones nobody else seems to know about. And the shooting down of Yamamoto, which turned out to be, as far as I'm concerned, one of the worst blows that happened to the Japanese in World War II. This man was not only a legend, he was a brilliant legend. He got blamed, or let me rephrase that. He took the blame for the loss at the Battle of Midway, when it wasn't at all his fault. I don't know that you could say it was anybody's fault. Somebody up there was looking out for us. And that's a long story in itself. He never quite recovered from that. And to show you the type of man that he was, he went to the emperor and personally apologized for the losses at the Battle of Midway. How many of our leaders would do that today? I can count them on this hand. So that's kind of the story of the loss of Yamamoto. And as I said at the beginning, I didn't have that kind of admiration for him at the beginning of the war, or for quite some time afterwards, because I didn't know that much about it. In war, you have to have a certain amount of praise for the good guy and bad mouthing for the bad guy. That's an absolute necessity. And in World War II, those of you who, well, I always put it this way. Anyone in the audience, I don't care who you are, who was 9 or 10 years old or older, when Pearl Harbor was bombed, when you first heard about it, I can absolutely guarantee you that you can not only remember that, but you can remember where you were, who you were talking to, where, everything around. You can just draw a mental picture. I can. I was buying my 10 cents worth of gas for the week for my Model A Roadster. And I didn't want to believe the radio. This is what was taking place and what set this up. People don't realize. We talk about Iraq and Afghanistan today, for instance. Look at the calendars. We're talking about years. World War II did not make it to its 4th anniversary. And it was all over the world. This is the difference. Things were happening so fast that we're never going to know everything that took place. Sometimes years, many years later, we find evidence of something. Then I have to look up to go through the history books to find out what the heck that might have been. And it was all over the world. With that, I thank you, and I'm going to turn the program back over to Greg.
Thank you, Blaine. Boy, what a way to bring the Saturday program series to an end here. For how about one more hand for our speakers?
And they knew what they were doing. Now, Zero was lighter. It did not have self-sealing fuel tanks, and it had no armor, which was a bad thing. Now, especially if you were the pilot of the Zero. Now, the interesting thing about the Zero is that, well, there's the pilot is embedded in the aircraft in more of a, they call a birdcage canopy. And he didn't have that good of visibility behind it. The Zero pilot was up high to see what was going on. Now, the Japanese, the Zero's going to make 3 passes today. There we go. From your left to right, it will make 3 passes. It'll make and there's the smoke. You caught a little flak down there by Atlantic.